2:15 in the morning. An Iranian ballistic missile was already rising from a hardened launch site near Tabriz. This was not a scheduled test flight over the interior deserts of the Iranian plateau. The infrared signature captured by United States early warning satellites showed a trajectory aimed directly toward the eastern Mediterranean. At the Combat Information Center in Colorado, analysts realized they had exactly 4 minutes to decide if this was the beginning of a global conflict. The Iranian plateau was a jagged shadow under the moon. Above the silence of the Zagros Mountains, the solid fuel booster of the Shahab-3 tore through the thin atmosphere. It was a spear of white light moving at 6 times the speed of sound. For 30 years, the protocol for a launch from this specific sector was absolute. It triggered an immediate transition to a high alert status for every American destroyer in the Persian Gulf. But as the heat bloom intensified on the monitors in Colorado, the senior watch officer noticed a deviation. The missile was not climbing to its expected orbital arc. Inside the mountain complex at Cheyenne Mountain, the air felt recycled and cold. General Sarah Vance leaned over the shoulder of a young technician. The screen showed a single pulsing red icon. It was moving fast. It was moving toward a sector of the sea where 3 Allied carrier strike groups were currently conducting exercises. General Vance spoke to the room. "I want a confirmed track. Is that a standard re-entry vehicle?" The technician responded immediately. "Ma'am, the thermal profile is inconsistent. It is too hot for a standard warhead. But the velocity is dropping." "Confirm the target point," Vance ordered. "Calculated impact is the eastern Mediterranean, 300 miles off the coast of Cyprus. 400 miles away from the launch site, the crew of the USS Arleigh Burke received the flash override message. The ship was slicing through the black water of the Mediterranean at 22 knots. Inside the Combat Information Center, the blue glow of the Aegis display system illuminated the faces of 40 sailors. The tactical action officer called out, "Birds in the air, tracking an inbound ballistic contact. Bearing 095. Range is 800 miles and closing." The captain of the Burke entered the center. "Do we have a solution?" "We have a firm track. Command is requesting a standby for intercept." Back in Iran, near the Tabriz facility, the atmosphere was equally clinical. This was not a rogue launch. It was a calculated move. But even the Iranian commanders looked at their telemetry with a sense of growing unease. The payload was behaving in a way their simulations had never predicted. The booster had separated early. The nose cone was oscillating. The Iranian launch commander spoke into his headset. "Verify the stabilization." "We cannot lose the package before the deployment phase," a technician replied. "The drag is increasing. We are hitting the edge of the atmosphere. Deployment in 60 seconds." The world was now 2 minutes away from a kinetic engagement. To the automated systems on both sides, this was a mathematical problem. To the men and women watching the screens, it was a terrifying ambiguity. If the Americans fired their interceptors, the Iranians would view it as an act of war. If the Americans did not fire, and the missile carried a nuclear payload, the fleet would be lost. The missile reached an altitude of 110 miles. It was at the very edge of space, where the blackness meets the thin blue line of the Earth. The friction of the ascent had turned the nose cone into a white-hot point of light. On every radar screen from Tel Aviv to Ramstein, the object was the only thing that mattered. General Vance watched the timer on the wall. It was counting down in seconds. 1 minute until we lose the window for a mid-course intercept, she said. The room remained silent. Every eye was on the red icon. It had reached its highest point. It was now at apogee. This was the moment when gravity should take over and pull the weapon down in a predictable, deadly curve. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 2:18 in the morning. Over the pitch-black curve of the Earth, a constellation of satellites detected the flare. The space-based infrared system sensors registered the heat of the solid fuel booster as it punched through the troposphere. The data was instantaneous. It surged through high-speed fiber optic cables and satellite downlinks, screaming into the ears of watchers in Washington and the Persian Gulf. On the bridge of the USS Arleigh Burke, the world had shrunk to the size of a phosphorus green screen. The ship was a billion-dollar weapon system, and right now, it was waking up. The SPY-1D radar was no longer just scanning. It was focused. It was pouring massive amounts of electromagnetic energy into a single patch of sky over the Iranian border. The tactical action officer adjusted his headset. Track number 7042 is confirmed. Ballistic. Altitude is climbing through 400,000 feet. Speed is Mach 6.2. The captain stood behind the console. Show me the intercept geometry. A computer-generated line appeared on the screen. It was a cold, white arc that intersected with the red line of the Iranian missile. The two lines met in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. "We are in the window," the officer said. "Weapon system is in auto special. We have a fire control solution." In the bunker near Tabriz, the air was thick with the smell of ozone and electronics. Commander Rezai watched the telemetry with a steady gaze. His fingers were laced together behind his back. To the outside world, this looked like a provocation. To him, it was a desperate race. The package inside the nose cone was never meant to be a weapon. It was a prototype, a high-velocity recovery capsule, containing 3 years of classified research. But if the Americans mistook it for a warhead, 3 years of work would be turned into a cloud of titanium scrap in seconds. The commander turned to his communications officer. "Status of the encrypted beacon. The beacon is active, sir, but the American sensors may not be tuned to the frequency. They are seeing a Shahab-3 signature. They are seeing a threat." Rezai looked back at the screen. "Then we must hope their commanders are more patient than their computers." 2:19 in the morning. The missile was now at its maximum velocity. It was a screaming needle of metal crossing international borders at 12,000 miles per hour. Inside the Combat Information Center of the Burke, the atmosphere had shifted from professional to lethal. The ship's computers were now doing millions of calculations per second. They were accounting for the rotation of the Earth, the density of the upper atmosphere, and the exact thrust of the SM-3 interceptor missiles sitting in the vertical launch cells on the foredeck. "Captain," the tactical officer said, "range is now 400 miles. If we do not launch in 30 seconds, the intercept probability drops below 50%. The captain did not look away from the screen. "Hold. I want a secondary classification. Look at the RCS. The radar cross-section. Sir, it is a standard Shahab-3 profile. Look closer," the captain insisted. "It is wobbling. A warhead does not wobble at apogee." The officer squinted at the digital readout. The red icon was flickering. The computer was trying to smooth out the data. But the raw return was messy. The object was shedding something. Or it was changing shape. 2:20 in the morning. In Colorado, General Vance held the secure handset to her ear. The president's military aide was on the other end. The question was simple. Is it a threat? Vance looked at the latest satellite feed. The missile had reached the top of its climb. It was hanging there for a fraction of a second, suspended between the pull of the Earth and the vacuum of space. "Wait," Vance whispered. The red icon on the screen suddenly split in two. Then three. The American sensors flared. As the nose cone of the Iranian missile didn't just fall, it disintegrated. Inside the Burke, the alarms changed pitch. Multiple contacts. Breakup detected. "We have multiple inbound targets." The captain gripped the edge of the console. "Is it a MIRV? Is it multiple warheads?" "I cannot classify," the officer shouted. "Wait, something is wrong. The velocity is crashing. It is not accelerating toward the ground." The main body of the missile had disappeared. In its place, a single, large object was silhouetted against the stars. It was moving too slowly to be a weapon. It was drifting. The tactical officer's voice went thin. "Sir, Contact 7042 has deployed a parachute, 2:21 in the morning, the National Military Command Center in the Pentagon." Inside the secure room, the silence was heavy. The parachute deployment had changed the math, but it had not lowered the tension. In the world of ballistic missile defense, a sudden change in shape or velocity at the edge of space is usually a sign of a decoy. It is a tactic designed to fool the Aegis radar and the interceptors. General Vance kept the phone pressed to her ear. The target is drifting. It is no longer a ballistic threat. But we cannot rule out a submunition or a specialized dispersal system. The voice from the White House was calm but firm. General, if that is a chemical or biological payload, a parachute is the most effective way to contaminate a wide area. What is the intercept window? We have 60 seconds before the object enters the lower atmosphere, Vance replied. After that, the SM-3 interceptors cannot hit it. We would have to use terminal defenses. The risk of debris falling on civilian populations increases 10 times. 2:22 in the morning. The Eastern Mediterranean. On the deck of the USS Arleigh Burke, the sea was a deep and restless black. Below decks, in the Combat Information Center, the captain faced a choice that would be studied in war colleges for decades. The ship was still in auto special mode. The computers were literally begging to fire. A blinking white prompt on the screen read, "Recommend engage." The tactical action officer looked at his commander. "Sir, the target is now at 60,000 feet. It is falling at only 100 knots. This is not a warhead. It is a pod." "Confirm the thermal signature," the captain ordered. "It is cooling rapidly. No active propulsion detected. Sir, if we do not fire now, the window is closed." The captain took a breath. "Disable auto engagement. Shift to manual tracking. We are not shooting down a parachute until we know what is hanging from it." 300 miles to the east, in the bunker near Tabriz, the Iranian commanders were watching the same physics. They saw the American radar energy spiking. They knew the Arleigh Burke was painting their package, with enough radiation to fry a bird in flight. Commander Rezai leaned forward. "They are waiting." "Why are they waiting?" The communications officer didn't look up from his screen. Perhaps they see the parachute, or perhaps they are preparing a massive response. "Check the recovery beacon again," Rezai commanded. "If the Americans do not fire, the package will splash down in international waters in 8 minutes. We need our fast attack craft at the coordinates before the American helicopters arrive." 2:23 in the morning. The object was now visible on the long-range infrared cameras of a circling Pate Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft. The video feed was grainy and green, jumping with the vibration of the plane. It showed a massive white canopy billowing in the thin air of the upper stratosphere. Beneath it, a dark, cylindrical shape swayed gently. The pilot of the Pate spoke over the secure link. "Control. This is Giant Killer 1-1. I have visual on the contact. It looks like a sensor pod. I repeat, it looks like a high-altitude surveillance package. There is no sign of a warhead or secondary boosters." Inside the Burke, the tension broke just enough for the crew to breathe. But the captain knew the danger had only shifted. "Inform 6th Fleet," the captain said. "The ballistic threat is over. But we have a recovery operation in progress, and we are not the only ones who want that pod." He looked at the surface radar. 12 miles away, 3 small, high-speed contacts had appeared near the Iranian coast. They were moving at 45 knots, straight toward the calculated splashdown point. 2:24 in the morning. The Eastern Mediterranean. The object was no longer a ballistic threat. It was now a prize. On the radar screens of the USS Arleigh Burke, the red icon had turned into a slow-moving amber dot. It was drifting through 20,000 feet. The parachute was fully open now, caught in the high-altitude winds that pushed it further into international waters. Inside the Combat Information Center, the captain stared at the surface display. 3 green triangles were moving fast from the east. They were Iranian Bagamar fast attack craft. They were doing 50 knots. The captain turned to his tactical officer. "What is our distance to the splashdown point?" 32 nautical miles, sir, the officer replied. "The Iranians are closer. They have 12 miles to go. If they maintain this speed, they will reach the pod 5 minutes before we can get a boat in the water." "What about the helicopters?" the captain asked. 2 MH-60 Romeos are on the pad. They can be over the site in 6 minutes. "But sir, The rules of engagement are unclear. We are in international waters. We have no legal authority to seize Iranian property unless it poses an immediate threat. 2:25 in the morning. The Pentagon. General Vance was now on a three-way secure line with the Secretary of Defense and the Commander of United States Naval Forces Europe. The tension had shifted from nuclear anxiety to a tactical chess match. The Secretary's voice was gravelly. "General, if that pod contains advanced sensor data or encrypted Western components, we cannot let it go back to Tehran. What are our options?" Vance looked at the live feed from the Pate aircraft. "We can orbit the site. We can use the helicopters to create a physical barrier. But if the Iranians fire on our aircraft, we are in a shooting war. Right now, the Iranians are the ones claiming salvage rights." "Change the rules of engagement," the Secretary ordered. "The Arleigh Burke is authorized to use non-kinetic means to prevent recovery. Give them the long-range acoustic device. Give them the dazzlers. But do not fire unless fired upon." Back on the Burke, the hangar doors slid open. The twin engines of the first Romeo helicopter whined into life. The rotors began to blur, throwing salt spray across the deck. The pilot's voice came over the ship's internal net. "Raven 1-1 is ready for departure. Mission is intercept and overwatch. Confirm ROE." The air boss replied from the tower. "Raven 1-1. You are authorized to shadow the Iranian craft. You are not authorized to engage. Repeat, do not engage. Your goal is to keep eyes on the package." The helicopter lifted off the deck, tilting its nose down as it accelerated into the dark. Below it, the Iranian fast attack craft were leaving long, white wakes in the water. They were not slowing down. They were not zigzagging. They were heading straight for the point where the parachute would hit the waves. In the Iranian bunker, Commander Rezai watched the American helicopter appear on his radar. He knew the Americans were faster. He knew they were watching. "Tell the boats to prepare the recovery nets," Rezai said. "If the Americans try to block us, the boats are to maintain course. Do not deviate. We will show them that we are not intimidated." The object was now at 10,000 feet. It was falling through a layer of light clouds. The parachute looked like a ghostly jellyfish in the moonlight. Below it, the sea was waiting, and so were the guns. 2:26 in the morning. The Eastern Mediterranean. The pod was falling through 8,000 feet. On the infrared cameras of the Raven 1-1 helicopter, the parachute looked like a glowing bloom against the freezing blackness of the upper atmosphere. The pilot, Lieutenant Commander Miller, banked the Seahawk into a wide orbit. Below him, the sea was a chaotic tapestry of white foam and dark water. Miller keyed his radio. "Burke. This is Raven 1-1. I am on station. I have visual on the package. I also have 3 Iranian fast attack craft at my 12 o'clock. Distance is 2 miles from the projected splashdown. They are not slowing down." The voice of the tactical officer on the Arleigh Burke came back instantly. "Copy. Raven 1. Maintain a distance of 500 yards from the craft. Do not overfly them. Use the searchlight to signal intent." 2:27 in the morning. The Iranian boats were Boghammer high-speed patrol craft. They were narrow, lethal, and powered by massive outboard engines that threw plumes of spray 20 feet into the air. On the lead boat, a young officer named Lieutenant Karim stood behind the center console. He looked up and saw the American helicopter, hovering like a giant predatory insect. Karim spoke into his radio, his voice competing with the roar of the engines. "The Americans are here. They are using their lights. They are trying to blind us." From the command center near Tabriz, the order was clear. "Ignore the lights. You have the right of salvage. If the Americans interfere with the physical recovery, you are authorized to uncover the heavy machine guns. Do not fire unless they move to hoist the package." 2:28 in the morning. The pod was now at 3,000 feet. The wind was gusting, pushing the parachute in a slow, clockwise spiral. It was going to hit the water, less than 500 meters from the lead Iranian boat. Inside the Raven 1-1, the co-pilot gripped the cyclic. "They are uncovering the mounts, Skipper. 12.7mm guns. They are tracking us. Miller adjusted his night vision goggles. I see them. Keep us at 500 feet. Switch the searchlight to strobe. Let them know we are watching every move. The helicopter's nose-mounted sensor ball tracked the boats with mechanical precision. On the deck of the Burke, 30 miles away, the captain watched the live feed. He could see the Iranian sailors clinging to the railings as the boats slammed through the waves. He could see the canvas covers being pulled back from the deck guns. They are committed, the captain whispered. Sir, the tactical officer said, the pod is at 1,000 feet. Splashdown in 30 seconds. 2:29 in the morning. The parachute hit the water first. It collapsed into a massive white sheet, briefly illuminated by the strobing light of the helicopter. Then, the heavy cylindrical pod splashed down with a violent surge of white water. It bobbed for a moment, stabilized by internal floats, and then began to drift with the current. The lead Iranian boat cut its engines. The sudden silence was replaced by the thrumming beat of the Seahawk's rotors. The boat coasted toward the white fabric of the parachute. Lieutenant Karim shouted to his crew, "Get the hooks! Secure the lines! Move!" One of his sailors reached out with a long carbon fiber pole. The hook caught the edge of the parachute shroud. Above them, Miller felt the tension in his own cockpit. Control. The Iranians have physical contact with the shroud. They are preparing to tow the package. Request instructions. The response from the Burke was clipped. Raven 1-1. Deploy the sonar buoy. We need to know if that pod is transmitting. And Miller, if they try to lift it, do not let them. The standoff had reached its highest pressure point. The Iranians had the prize. The Americans had the sky. Neither side knew that the pod was about to wake up. 2:30 in the morning. The Eastern Mediterranean. The lead Iranian boat was now tethered to the white fabric of the parachute. The engine of the Bagamar idle choked in the swell. Lieutenant Karim watched as two of his men struggled to haul the shroud lines over the gunwale. The pod itself was heavy. It was a 3-meter cylinder of dull composite material, partially submerged and slick with seawater. High above, the Raven 1-1 helicopter hovered. The downward pressure from its rotors turned the sea into a blurred circle of mist. Lieutenant Commander Miller keyed his radio. Control. The Iranians are attempting to hoist the package. They have a winch on the lead boat. I am seeing high-intensity thermal activity from the base of the pod. It is shedding heat, fast. Inside the Arleigh Burke, the tactical officer gripped his armrests. Raven, confirm. Is it an internal power source? Confirmed. My sensors are spiking. It is not a passive buoy. It is broadcasting. 2:31 in the morning. The ship's electronic warfare suite began to scream. Every monitor in the Combat Information Center suddenly filled with a wall of white noise. The Aegis system, the most advanced radar on the planet, was being blinded, not by a jammer from the Iranian coast, but by the pod itself. The captain stood up. Filter the signal. Go to manual frequency hopping. I cannot clear it, sir, the electronic warfare officer shouted. The source is less than 30 miles away. It is a wideband pulse. It is saturating everything from the S-band to the X-band. In the air, Miller felt the helicopter shudder. His digital flight displays flickered. The green glow of his night vision goggles pulsed with static. Burke, Raven 1-1. We are losing avionics. The pod is an active jammer. Repeat. The package is an active electronic countermeasure. I am losing flight control stability. 2:31 and 30 seconds in the morning. On the Iranian boat, Lieutenant Karim did not know about the radar interference. He only saw his men fly backward as the pod suddenly emitted a low, vibrating hum that could be felt through the hull of the boat. The water around the cylinder began to boil, not from heat, but from high-frequency cavitation. The Iranian commander in the Tabriz bunker saw his own telemetry go dark. Loss of signal. What happened to the boat? The American helicopter is still there, the technician replied, but our sensors are gone. We have total electronic blackout over the splashdown site. 2:32 in the morning. The tension snapped. On the Arleigh Burke, the weapons system indicated a lock, not on the pod, but on the Iranian boats. The automated defense systems had classified the electronic pulse as an attack. Weapon system is in auto fire. The tactical officer yelled, The computer thinks we are under electronic engagement. 5 seconds to missile release. The captain lunged across the console. Authorization code Alpha 17. Terminate the sequence. The screen flashed red. Abort. Abort. The missiles stayed in their cells. But on the water, the Iranian crews saw the American ship's 5-inch gun turret rotate. The long barrel lowered. It pointed directly at the lead boat. Lieutenant Karim reached for the heavy machine gun. He didn't wait for an order. He saw the American gun moving. He saw the helicopter diving toward him to regain control. He pulled the charging handle. The metallic clack was audible even over the wind. Inside the Raven 1-1, Miller saw the gunner on the boat aim the 12.7mm barrel at his cockpit. Taking aim. Target lock. "I am engaging defensive maneuvers," Miller shouted. The helicopter flared. The boat rocked. The Arleigh Burke held its breath. The world was 1 second away from a flash of light that would start a war. 2:33 in the morning. The silence that followed the electronic pulse was more deafening than the screaming alarms. On the Arleigh Burke, every screen in the Combat Information Center flickered and then settled into a steady, calm blue. The tactical action officer stared at his console. The auto-fire prompt was gone. The target lock on the Iranian boats had dissolved. On the water, Lieutenant Karim felt the heavy machine gun in his hands go cold. The vibrating hum from the pod had stopped. He looked down at the cylinder bobbing in the dark water. The boiling cavitation had ceased. In its place, a small hatch on the side of the pod slid open with a mechanical hiss. Inside the Raven 1-1 helicopter, Miller leveled his aircraft. His flight displays were back online. Burke, Raven 1-1. The jamming has terminated. I am seeing a physical change in the package. The pod is opening. 2:34 in the morning. A high-intensity light began to pulse from the center of the opened hatch. It was not a weapon. It was a projector. A beam of white light shot upward, hitting the underside of the parachute canopy, which was still draped over the waves. The fabric acted as a massive, improvised screen. Images began to flicker across the white nylon. They were not military codes. They were not images of war. They were rows of scrolling data in a language that neither Karim nor Miller immediately recognized. The captain of the Arleigh Burke watched the live feed from the helicopter. "Get a linguist in here, now." The tactical officer leaned in, his face pale in the glow of the monitor. "Sir, I recognize that header. That is not Iranian. That is a European Space Agency signature. Specifically, it is the tracking data for the Copernicus Environmental Satellite Network." 2:35 in the morning. The realization hit both command centers simultaneously. In the bunker near Tabriz, Commander Rezai stared at the same data on his secondary monitors. His technicians were frantic. "Sir." The pod was not a sensor. It was a data logger from the Ariane rocket that failed over the Indian Ocean last week. The parachute deployment was a pre-programmed emergency recovery. The Iranian missile had not been a weapon at all. It had been a catch-and-retrieve booster, a desperate, high-speed attempt by the Iranian Space Agency to intercept a falling piece of international commercial hardware that had drifted into their airspace. They had launched a missile to save a hard drive. Inside the Burke, the captain slumped back into his chair. The adrenaline was still coursing through his system, but the target was no longer a threat. It was a piece of space junk, a very expensive, very sensitive piece of scientific equipment that both nations had almost started a war over. The captain keyed the fleet-wide broadcast. "All stations, stand down. I repeat, stand down. The contact is classified as a civilian recovery operation. Secure all weapon systems." On the boat, Lieutenant Karim saw the American helicopter bank away. The searchlight was turned off. The strobing pulse stopped. The sea was dark again, illuminated only by the faint, flickering data projected onto the parachute. Karim looked at his men. They were all shaking. He spoke into his radio, his voice barely a whisper. "The Americans are moving off. They are letting us take it." Rezai's voice came back from the bunker, sounding aged and tired. "Secure the package, Lieutenant, and bring it home. Slowly." The crisis had peaked. The pivot was complete. The world had come to the edge of a precipice because of a falling satellite and a misunderstanding of physics. 2:40 in the morning. The Eastern Mediterranean. The Iranian fast attack craft were no longer moving at intercept speed. The roar of their outboard engines had settled into a steady, low-frequency thrum as they began the slow process of towing the recovery pod toward the coastline. The white fabric of the parachute trailed behind them in the water like a long, ghostly shroud. The high-tension energy that had filled the air minutes ago was replaced by a heavy, exhausted silence. Inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Arleigh Burke, the captain stood by the primary display. The red icons of the Iranian boats had been reclassified as neutral. The tactical action officer was finishing a secure transmission to the European Space Agency headquarters in Darmstadt, Germany. The officer looked up from his headset. "Sir, ESA confirms. They lost the telemetry link for the Copernicus sensor package 4 days ago. The satellite had a catastrophic bus failure over the Indian Ocean. They were tracking the re-entry but lost the signal when the emergency parachute deployed." The captain nodded slowly, and the Iranians picked up the signal. They used a Shahab-3 airframe to put a recovery vehicle into the descent path. It was a high-speed interception of a falling object, not a strike. 2:45 in the morning. The logic of the Iranian launch began to align with the data, the erratic trajectory, the early booster separation, the massive heat signature that had looked like a warhead but was actually the friction of a retrieval pod hitting the atmosphere at Mach 6. To the American early warning systems, it was the profile of an attack. To the Iranian engineers, it was the only way to catch a piece of hardware falling from orbit before it sank into the deep water of the Mediterranean. Inside the Raven 11 helicopter, Lieutenant Commander Miller watched the Iranian boats through his thermal camera. The sailors on the deck were using hand-cranked winches to stabilize the pod against the hull of the lead boat. They looked small and vulnerable in the vast, dark expanse of the sea. Miller spoke into his radio. "Burke, Raven 11. The recovery is 70% complete. The Iranians are beginning a slow turn to the east, bearing 0905. Speed is 6 knots. They are heading back toward territorial waters." "Copy. Raven 11. The tactical officer replied. "Maintain observation from 5 miles out. Do not approach. We are letting them have this one." 2:50 in the morning. The Pentagon. General Vance sat in the dim light of the National Military Command Center. On the wall-sized monitors, the global map was returning to its standard state of readiness. The flash messages were being downgraded to routine, but the tension in the room remained. Vance spoke into the secure line to the White House. "Mr. President, we have confirmed the nature of the payload. It was a civilian environmental sensor. The Iranians successfully recovered it. We have stood down the Aegis ships, but we need to address the automation issue." The voice on the other end was quiet. "Explain, General." "The Aegis system functioned exactly as it was designed," Vance said. "It saw a ballistic signature and prepared to fire. If the captain of the Burke had not intervened manually, we would have destroyed a civilian research pod and killed 12 Iranian sailors. We were 30 seconds away from a regional war triggered by a weather satellite." In the bunker near Tabriz, Commander Rezai watched the last of the telemetry from the pod as it was hauled onto the deck of the lead boat. His hands were no longer clenched behind his back. He allowed himself to sit down for the first time in an hour. The communications officer turned to him. "Sir, the Americans are still shadowing, but their fire control radars are in standby mode. They are watching us go home." Rezai stared at the screen. He saw the single blue icon of the Arleigh Burke, 30 miles away, a silent sentinel in the dark. "They knew," Rezai whispered. "In the end, they saw what it was. Tell the boats to maintain a professional formation. No victory laps. No signals. We are lucky to be alive." The sea was calm now. The parachute had been pulled from the waves. The dark cylinder of the pod sat securely on the deck of the Iranian craft. The two nations, which had been seconds from a kinetic exchange, were now just two groups of professionals watching each other across the miles of black water. The crisis was over. The assessment was just beginning. 3 o'clock in the morning. The Eastern Mediterranean. The 12-mile limit of Iranian territorial waters was a line drawn on a digital map. But to the men on the water, it was the finish line of a marathon they had barely survived. The 3 Iranian boghammer boats slowed as they crossed the threshold. Behind them, the recovery pod sat lashed to the lead boat, its white parachute now a wet, heavy pile of fabric on the deck. On the bridge of the USS Arleigh Burke, the captain watched the green icons cross the boundary. The ship had slowed to 10 knots. The bow wave was a gentle curl of white in the moonlight. The frantic energy of the Combat Information Center had cooled into a professional, weary rhythm. The captain picked up the radio handset. "Com, give me the bridge-to-bridge frequency. Channel 16. Sir, you are going to speak to them." "I am," the captain said. He keyed the mic. His voice was steady and devoid of emotion. "Iranian patrol craft. This is United States Navy Warship 70. You are entering your territorial waters. We are maintaining our course in international air and sea space. We acknowledge your recovery of the civilian research package. Safe passage." 3 o'clock and 1 minute in the morning. On the lead Iranian boat, Lieutenant Karim heard the voice crackle over the maritime radio. The English was clear and crisp. The tone was not one of victory or defeat. It was the tone of a professional recognizing another professional across a narrow gap of survival. Karim looked back at the silhouette of the American destroyer. It was a jagged, gray mountain on the horizon, illuminated by the faint glow of the coming dawn. He picked up his own handset. "United States Warship 70. This is Iranian patrol. Understood. We are proceeding to port. Out." 3:15 in the morning. Inside the Arleigh Burke, the order was given to secure from general quarters. The sailors who had been at their battle stations for nearly 2 hours began to stand down. They moved with the slow, deliberate motions of people who had just realized how close they had come to the end. In the mess decks, the smell of fresh coffee began to drift through the vents. The tactical action officer sat back and rubbed his eyes. "Sir, report from 7th Fleet. The diplomatic cables are already flying. The Iranians are claiming this as a successful test of their space tracking capabilities. They are not mentioning the missile profile or the fact that they almost took a hit from an SM-3. "Of course they aren't," the captain replied. "And we aren't going to mention that our automated systems almost fired on a weather satellite. We all go home with our secrets today." 3:30 in the morning. The Tabriz bunker. Commander Rezai was the last to leave the operations floor. The monitors were being wiped of the tactical data. The trajectory lines, the intercept points, and the heat signatures were being archived into encrypted drives. A senior analyst walked over to him, holding a tablet. "Commander, we have a preliminary look at the data from the pod. It was a clean recovery. But there is a discrepancy in the final log entry." Rezai looked at the screen. "What kind of discrepancy?" "The sensor package didn't just fail," the analyst said, his voice dropping. "It was triggered. The emergency parachute didn't deploy because of a bus failure. It was commanded to deploy by an external signal, a signal that didn't come from our facility, and it didn't come from the Europeans." Rezai felt a cold needle of ice in his chest. "If we didn't bring it down, and the owners didn't bring it down, who did?" The analyst shook his head. "I do not know. But whoever sent that signal knew exactly where the Arleigh Burke was located. They placed the pod right in the middle of a carrier strike group. They wanted us to see it." The sun began to crest over the mountain range. The sky turned a bruised purple. The crisis was resolved. The immediate threat of war had passed. But as the data began to reveal its secrets, a new and more chilling question began to emerge. The world had almost ended because of a technical error. Or, perhaps, it had almost ended because someone wanted to see if it would. The morning was clear, but the air felt heavy with the weight of a secret that was only beginning to surface. 6 in the morning. The Eastern Mediterranean. The sun climbed over the horizon, turning the surface of the sea into a sheet of hammered gold. On the deck of the USS Arleigh Burke, the night shift was being relieved. Sailors moved with a quiet, somber efficiency. There were no cheers. There was no celebration of a battle won. There was only the heavy, physical realization of what had almost happened. Inside the Combat Information Center, the air was finally clearing of the smell of stale coffee and recycled oxygen. The captain sat at his small desk in the corner of the room, writing his initial report. The digital clocks on the wall showed the time in 4 different zones. Each one represented a place where the world had almost changed forever. The captain stopped writing for a moment and looked at the primary tactical display. It was now clear of all threats. The Iranian boats were long gone. The radar showed only commercial tankers and a few fishing vessels. The high-stakes chess match had ended in a draw. And in the world of modern warfare, a draw was the greatest possible victory. 24 hours later, the Pentagon. General Vance stood in a small, windowless briefing room. On the table before her was a thick folder marked Top Secret. It was the after-action report for the Tabriz anomaly. She was waiting for the Joint Chiefs of Staff to arrive. She flipped to the final page. The analysis was cold and clinical. It detailed how the Aegis combat system had functioned perfectly according to its programming. It had detected a ballistic launch. It had calculated a threat. It had prepared a response. The machine had done everything right. And yet, the machine had almost started a war. The report also mentioned the mysterious external signal. Intelligence agencies were already tracing it back to a rogue server in a third-party nation. It was a sophisticated cyber intrusion designed to trigger the recovery pod's emergency systems at the exact moment it would cause maximum friction between Washington and Tehran. It was a provocation by a silent actor, a test of the world's hair-trigger defenses. 3 days later, Tehran. A military funeral was held for a sailor who had died during a separate training exercise. But at the highest levels of the Iranian command, the focus remained on the Tabriz facility. Commander Rezai had been reassigned to a strategic planning role. His report on the incident was being read by the Supreme National Security Council. Rezai had written one sentence that stood out in the sea of technical data. Was not the American missiles, but the speed of the American response. The systems were moving faster than the humans could think. He concluded that the only reason the Mediterranean was not currently a graveyard was because one man on a single ship chose to wait 10 seconds before pushing a button. The strategic assessment was clear. The Tabriz anomaly was not an isolated event. It was a warning. As weapon systems become more automated and AI-driven, the window for human intervention is shrinking. The distance between a sensor error and a nuclear exchange is now measured in heartbeats. Modern conflict is no longer just a battle of steel and explosives. It is a battle of information and restraint. Both sides had looked into the abyss and seen their own reflection in the glowing screens of their command centers. They had realized that the most advanced technology in the world is useless if it removes the human capacity for doubt. No missiles flew, no ships were lost, but history shifted. When the line was crossed, both sides chose restraint. Modern warfare is decided not by who fires first, but by who chooses not to fire at all. The Mediterranean remained blue and indifferent. The winds covered the tracks of the boats. The sky held no memory of the white-hot arc of the long-range missile. The world continued to turn, unaware of how close it had come to stopping.